I never thought the quiet streets of a suburban neighborhood could feel so foreign after years of deployments. For most people here, the loudest sound in the morning was a lawnmower or kids riding bikes down the sidewalk. For me, after living with the constant hum of helicopters, gunfire in the distance, and the weight of body armor pressing against my chest, this calm felt almost unreal. It had been months since I left active duty as a Navy SEAL. My transition to civilian life wasn't perfect, but Sarah, my wife, made it bearable. She had a way of grounding me, reminding me that there was life after combat. Our days had fallen into a rhythm: coffee at sunrise, Sarah working on her garden, and me tinkering with tools in the garage. On the surface, it looked like the American dream. Beneath it, though, I never really switched off the instincts that had kept me alive overseas. My eyes always tracked vehicles that didn't belong. My ears always tuned into sounds others ignored. Old habits don't die, they just wait. That morning began like any other. Sarah slipped on her sun hat, humming as she carried her watering can. I watched her from the garage, wiping grease off my hands as I adjusted the old generator I'd been repairing. Everything seemed normal until I noticed her body stiffen mid-step. Sarah had sharp instincts too, not military level, but enough to sense when something was wrong. I followed her gaze. A black SUV rolled slowly down our street, its tinted windows catching the morning light. Nothing unusual about SUVs in the suburbs, but this one felt off. It circled the block once. Then twice. On the third pass, it braked sharply and stopped across the street from our house. The engine idled, growling low like a predator waiting to pounce. I set my wrench down, watching closely. My pulse didn't spike, I'd trained too long for that, but the hairs on my neck stood up. Years of combat had taught me the difference between casual movement and surveillance. This wasn't coincidence. The doors opened. 3 men stepped out. They weren't neighbors. They weren't delivery drivers. They weren't cops, though they wanted everyone to think they were. Each wore a black tactical vest with shiny patches stitched to the front, patches that glinted like law enforcement insignia, but the details were sloppy, wrong. From the garage, my eyes tracked every flaw: nylon belts that looked too thin, holsters clipped awkwardly to their sides, and the most telling sign: no radios, no earpieces. Real officers never show up without communication gear. Sarah noticed it too. I could tell by the way her shoulders squared, the way her grip on the watering can tightened. The tallest of the 3 crossed the street, walking directly toward our yard. His pace was deliberate, trying too hard to look authoritative. He stopped at the edge of our driveway and barked, "Ma'am, HOA compliance inspection." He flashed a badge so fake it could have come from the clearance bin at a toy store. I stayed in the garage, partly in shadow, letting Sarah handle the first interaction. She was calm but firm, her voice steady. "Since when does the HOA hire police officers?" The second man smirked, his teeth crooked and yellow. "We're not hired, lady. We are the law here." I felt the air shift. Neighbors were starting to peek through curtains, watching the scene unfold. My hands itched with the urge to step forward, but I forced myself to wait. I needed to see their intent first. Sarah didn't back down. She reminded them trespassing on private property without cause was a crime. That's when the third one moved closer, his hand resting casually on the fake baton clipped to his side. His eyes lingered on Sarah with an arrogance that made my jaw tighten. I recognized the type instantly: untrained, insecure, hiding behind props to project power. In war zones, I'd seen plenty like him, men who put on uniforms they didn't earn, hoping fabric and symbols would make up for the lack of courage. Sarah reached for her phone, pulling it from her pocket. "You need to leave," she said. "Now." The thug's hand shot out fast. He slapped the phone out of her grip. The metallic clatter on the pavement echoed louder than it should have, slicing through the quiet morning. And then, in a move that made my blood run cold, he slapped Sarah across the face. Her gasp cut through me like a blade. She stumbled back, one hand pressed to her cheek, the other clutching the watering can that tipped, spilling water across the driveway. That was it. The line had been crossed. From the shadows of the garage, my calm ended. I stepped forward, slow and deliberate, and the three men finally noticed me. Their posturing faltered when they saw my eyes, because those weren't the eyes of a suburban homeowner. They were the eyes of a man who had walked into ambushes, who had buried friends, who had faced death more times than they could imagine. They didn't know it yet, but they had just picked the wrong house. The second I stepped out of the garage, the temperature of the air seemed to drop. The three men turned their attention to me, and I could see it in their faces. They hadn't expected resistance. Not here. Not in a neighborhood where most people waved politely and stayed out of trouble. I didn't speak right away. Instead, I walked toward Sarah, placing myself between her and the men. My eyes locked on the tallest one, the one who'd flashed the fake badge. His smug grin told me everything I needed to know. He thought intimidation would work. He thought he was in control. "You boys picked the wrong house," I said evenly. My voice wasn't raised, but it carried the kind of weight that made people listen. "You've got about 5 seconds to explain who sent you." The tall one sneered, squaring his shoulders like he wanted to prove he could match me in presence. "The HOA president told us you've been ignoring notices. We're here to make sure you comply." His words came sharp, rehearsed, like he'd been coached on what to say. But his posture gave him away, too loose, too sloppy. He had no training. None of them did. They were just bullies in costume. I told Sarah to go inside and lock the door. She hesitated only a second before obeying, her eyes lingering on me. She knew the look in mine. She'd seen it before, back when I was still deploying overseas. It was the look that meant trouble was seconds away. When the door clicked shut behind her, I turned my full attention back to the three. My stance shifted, feet shoulder-width apart, shoulders squared, weight balanced. It was the same stance I'd used countless times on missions when violence was imminent. The tall one jabbed a finger at me. "You think you can ignore HOA rules? You've been warned about your truck, your fence, those so-called military dogs. We're here to enforce compliance." A chuckle rose in my chest, dark and humorless. "First of all," I said, voice calm but razor-sharp, "I park legally. My fence is within city code. And those dogs you're talking about? They're service animals. Protected by federal law." Second, I stepped forward, closing the distance until he had to backpedal. "You're trespassing. And you're impersonating law enforcement. That's 10 years in prison, if you're lucky." The shorter thug, trying to save face, puffed out his chest. "You can't threaten us. We'll cuff you right here." He fumbled with the Velcro strap on his flimsy duty belt and pulled out a pair of plastic handcuffs that looked like they belonged in a kid's Halloween costume. I tilted my head, studying him. The last ounce of patience drained from me. "You're not cops," I said. "You're criminals." He took a step forward, raising the cuffs like he intended to slap them on me. That was when my training took over. My left hand shot out, lightning fast, grabbing his wrist and twisting hard. He yelped, dropping the cuffs as his knees buckled. Before he could recover, my right elbow slammed into his jaw with a precise, controlled strike. The sound of impact was sharp, final. He crumpled to the lawn like a sack of bricks. The second thug, the one with the baton, reacted instantly, charging with a wild swing aimed at my head. But wild swings are a rookie mistake. I sidestepped, caught his arm mid-swing, and used his own momentum to flip him over my shoulder. He hit the concrete hard, the air blasting out of his lungs in a grunt. Now only the tall one remained standing. His bravado evaporated, replaced by a flicker of fear. His eyes darted to his fallen partners, then back to me. For the first time, he looked unsure. "You're assaulting officers," he shouted, his voice cracking. I closed the distance between us, so close he could feel the heat off me. My voice dropped to a low growl. "No. I'm stopping 3 criminals from assaulting my wife." Big difference. Behind me, the door opened. Sarah stepped out again, her phone back in her hand, recording. Her cheek was red from the slap, but her hand was steady. "Already called the sheriff," she shouted. "They're on the way." The tall man's face twisted with panic. He cursed under his breath and bolted for the SUV parked across the street. But I wasn't about to let him run. I lunged, grabbing the back of his fake vest. He stumbled, off balance, as I yanked him hard against the hood of his own vehicle. The cheap stitching of his vest tore under my grip, but I pinned him there, his chest pressed against the metal, my knee digging into his back. He squirmed, but the truth was clear, he had no training. All the posing in the world couldn't save him now. Neighbors had gathered by this point, phones out, whispers filling the street. What they saw wasn't some rogue brawl. It was a Navy SEAL restraining a group of impostors who had just made the worst mistake of their lives. And the show wasn't over. Because in the distance, I could already hear the sirens. The wail of sirens grew louder, echoing off the houses as red and blue flashes lit the end of the street. The tall imposter squirmed under my grip, but it was useless. I had him pinned against the hood of his SUV, his fake badge pressed into the metal like the worthless trinket it was. His two partners weren't going anywhere either. One groaned on the lawn, clutching his jaw where my elbow had landed. The other lay flat on the driveway, struggling to breathe after hitting the concrete. Neighbors had gathered in a loose semicircle along the sidewalks. Phones were raised, whispers traded back and forth. Some faces showed shock. Others showed a quiet satisfaction, the kind you see when bullies finally get what's coming to them. When the sheriff's cruisers pulled up, their doors flew open. Two deputies stepped out, weapons drawn. Their voices boomed, sharp and commanding. "Hands where we can see them." Immediately, I raised my hands and stepped back from the man pinned under me. "They're yours," I said, my voice calm, measured. Sarah, standing by our porch with her phone still recording, shouted, "Those are the guys. They hit me and pretended to be cops." The deputies moved fast, their training obvious. In seconds, the three imposters were on the ground, wrists cuffed with real steel this time. Their fake vests and nylon belts were stripped off, tossed aside like garbage. One deputy pulled a fake badge out of the tall man's vest pocket and held it up. His lip curled. "This is a joke," he muttered. "You think this would fool anyone?" The imposter didn't answer. His jaw was clenched, sweat dripping down his temples. The bravado was gone. Sarah walked closer, holding her phone out. "I've got the whole thing on video," she said firmly. "They slapped me. They threatened my husband. They claimed to be law enforcement." The deputies exchanged a look, then one of them nodded. "Ma'am, that's excellent evidence." "Thank you." He turned to me. "Sir, did they identify themselves as police?" "Repeatedly," I said. "And they trespassed on my property. When my wife tried to record, one of them struck her across the face. That's when I stepped in." The shorter thug, still on the ground, groaned. "We were just following orders." "Orders from who?" one deputy snapped. Silence. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, under the weight of the question, and the reality of real law enforcement standing over him, the ringleader cracked. His shoulders sagged, and his voice came out bitter. It was the HOA president. Karen Ellis. She paid us cash. The words hung heavy in the air. Gasps rippled through the neighbors gathered nearby. Some of them glanced at each other knowingly, as if Karen's name being tied to something dirty didn't surprise them one bit. Sarah's eyes widened, her face pale but steady. She whispered, "Karen, she did this?" I clenched my fists at my sides. The image of Sarah clutching her cheek replayed in my mind, and the idea that it had been orchestrated by the woman who ran our neighborhood's HOA made my stomach twist with rage. The deputies didn't waste time. One of them read the three men their rights, while the other collected the fake gear into evidence bags. The imposters looked pitiful now, stripped of their costumes, exposed for what they really were, criminals playing dress-up. One deputy approached me again, his tone professional but respectful. "Sir, you handled yourself well. We'll need you both to come down to the station to give full statements. But from what we've seen here, you stopped 3 men from committing serious crimes." I nodded, steady. "Impersonating officers is a felony. Assaulting my wife is another. I'll be pressing charges." The tall impostor twisted his neck, glaring at me as he was shoved into the back of a cruiser. "You don't know what you've started," he hissed. I met his stare without blinking. "No. You don't." The door slammed shut, cutting off his voice. Sarah slipped her hand into mine, her fingers trembling but strong. "She's not going to get away with this," she whispered. I squeezed her hand gently, my eyes still on the flashing lights. "Not a chance." Karen wanted to scare us into falling in line. Instead, she just declared war. As the cruisers pulled away, taking the imposters toward a future they couldn't bluff their way out of, I felt the neighborhood watching. Some with fear, some with admiration, and some, maybe, for the first time, with hope. Because they'd all seen the truth. Karen Ellis, queen of the HOA, had crossed a line she could never uncross. And I wasn't done with her. Not by a long shot. The sheriff's station smelled of old coffee and disinfectant, a mix that instantly brought me back to forward operating bases overseas. Different country, different mission, but the same air of authority. Only here, instead of sandbags and body armor, there were filing cabinets and deputy uniforms. Sarah and I sat side by side in a small interview room, a metal table between us and a recorder blinking red in the center. Her cheek was still pink from the slap, but her hand was steady as she sipped from a paper cup of water. She was tougher than most people realized, tougher than even Karen Ellis had counted on. The door opened, and Sheriff Donnelly walked in. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with the kind of steady presence you could trust in a crisis. He glanced at the folder under his arm, then at us. "First of all," he said, setting the folder down, "let me be clear, you two are the victims here. Those men are in custody. They're facing charges for assault, trespassing, and most serious of all, impersonating law enforcement. That's a felony. They won't be walking out anytime soon." Sarah nodded, her voice quiet but firm. "Thank you, Sheriff. But I need to know, who told them to come after us?" The sheriff tapped the folder. "That's where things get interesting." He flipped it open, revealing photos of the fake gear laid out on an evidence table, the nylon belts, the plastic cuffs, the stitched-on patches that looked official from a distance but fell apart up close. "They broke fast once we separated them," Donnelly continued. "The tall one, their so-called leader, spilled first. Said they were hired, cash under the table, by someone who wanted to teach you a lesson. The other two confirmed it. No hesitation. They all gave the same name." I leaned forward, though I already knew what was coming. "Karen Ellis," the sheriff said flatly. Sarah inhaled sharply. Her hand found mine under the table. I let the name roll through my head, slow and deliberate. Karen Ellis, president of the HOA. A woman who had spent months nitpicking us, letters about the height of our fence, complaints about the color of our shutters, even questioning the legitimacy of my service dogs. It had started as annoyance. Then harassment. And now it had escalated into violence. "She paid them cash?" I asked. The sheriff nodded. $500 each, up front. Promised them more if they got you to comply. Her words. According to them, the instructions were clear: rough you up, scare your wife, make you fall in line. Sarah's jaw tightened. She wanted to scare me. Or worse, I added, my voice low. The sheriff didn't argue. He looked at me with a steadiness that told me he understood exactly what could have happened if I hadn't been there. She crossed a line, Donnelly said. And believe me, we're taking it seriously. We'll be forwarding charges to the DA's office, conspiracy to commit assault, solicitation, possibly even racketeering if this wasn't her first time pulling something like this. Sarah leaned forward. What do you need from us? Your statements. The video you recorded. And your willingness to testify, if it comes to that. I didn't hesitate. You'll have all of it. And if it goes to court, I'll be there. For a moment, silence settled over the room, heavy but resolute. Then Donnelly closed the folder and stood. Good. Because I'll be honest with you, most folks roll over when someone like Karen pushes them. They don't fight back. But what she did today, that's not HOA business. That's criminal. And it ends now. When he left, Sarah and I sat in silence for a while. She stared at the table, her fingers tracing the metal edge. She's not going to stop, Sarah said softly. You know that, right? I looked at her, at the mark still fading on her cheek, and felt the old instincts coil inside me again. No, I said. She won't. But neither will I. Sarah's lips curved into a faint smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. Then I guess the HOA president picked the wrong family to mess with. I leaned back in my chair, the recorder still blinking red, and thought about all the fights I'd been in. Overseas, the enemies had worn uniforms, carried rifles, fought for power. Here, in this neat little neighborhood, the enemy wore blazers and ran HOA board meetings. But make no mistake, it was still war. The first notice came in a plain white envelope. No stamp, just slid into our mailbox like a snake under a door. Inside was a neatly folded letter, printed on HOA stationery with the same sharp font Karen Ellis loved to wield like a weapon. It wasn't another warning about fences or landscaping. It was a formal notification, Karen Ellis versus John and Sarah Carter. Civil suit for damages, medical expenses, and emotional trauma. I read it twice before setting it down on the kitchen table. Sarah stood across from me, arms folded, her eyes scanning my face. She's suing us, I said flatly. Sarah's jaw dropped. Suing us? After she hired those men to attack me? I nodded slowly. That's her play. Flip the story. Paint herself as the victim. Sarah snatched the letter, reading it out loud in a mocking voice. Plaintiff alleges defendant used excessive force, resulting in serious injury and emotional distress. Plaintiff claims permanent damage to reputation and livelihood. She slammed the paper down. Permanent damage? She's the one who damaged her own reputation. I didn't answer right away. My mind was already shifting into tactical mode. This wasn't a fight with fists, it was a war of paperwork, depositions, and courtrooms. Different battlefield, but the same stakes. 2 days later, we were sitting in our lawyer's office. Tom Haskins was a sharp-eyed, gray-haired attorney who had spent 20 years as a prosecutor before switching to private practice. His shelves were lined with legal books and framed photos of him shaking hands with judges. He didn't waste time on small talk. I've seen Karen's kind before, he said, adjusting his glasses as he flipped through the lawsuit. Narcissistic. Vindictive. Always convinced they're smarter than the system. But this? He tapped the papers. This is weak. Very weak. Sarah leaned forward. So we'll win? Tom smiled faintly. If we fight it right, yes. But you need to understand, Karen's counting on intimidation. Most people settle just to avoid the stress. She doesn't expect you to stand your ground. I met his eyes. She miscalculated. Tom nodded approvingly. Good. Because I'll be filing a countersuit. Conspiracy to commit assault, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Once the jury sees that video of your wife being slapped, and you calmly restraining those imposters, Karen's case will collapse. Sarah exhaled, relief flickering across her face. So the video really is our best defense. It's more than that, Tom said. It's the nail in her coffin. The following weeks felt like a strange kind of deployment. Instead of packing gear, I packed evidence folders. Instead of patrols, there were depositions. Every time I walked into Tom's office, he had another document ready, copies of police reports, sworn statements from neighbors, transcripts of the imposters admitting Karen hired them. Karen, of course, didn't sit quietly. She doubled down, showing up at HOA meetings in dark sunglasses, whispering to neighbors about how I was dangerous and unstable. She painted Sarah as manipulative, even suggesting the video had been edited. But the tide was shifting. Neighbors who had once feared Karen now kept their distance from her. The sight of her SUV in the driveway didn't inspire deference anymore, it inspired whispered conversations and rolled eyes. The day of the preliminary hearing, Sarah and I walked into the courthouse hand in hand. Karen was already there, sitting stiff-backed with her lawyer, a younger man in a shiny suit who looked more nervous than confident. Karen herself wore a tailored blazer and too much perfume, her lips pressed into a thin line. When her eyes met mine across the courtroom, there was no fear, only defiance. She still believed she could win. The judge entered, the gavel struck, and the clerk began reading the case. Karen Ellis versus John Carter. As the words echoed, I felt Sarah squeeze my hand. This wasn't just about us anymore. This was about standing up to a bully who had hidden behind rules and fake authority for too long. Karen thought she could drag me into a fight I couldn't win. What she didn't know, what she could never understand, was that I had never lost a fight worth winning. And I wasn't about to start now. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, and the air smelled faintly of polished wood and ink. Sarah sat beside me, her hand resting on mine, calm but firm. Across the aisle, Karen Ellis perched like royalty on trial, dressed in her sharp blazer, pearls at her neck, lips pressed tight. Her lawyer, a slick young man named Preston Ward, adjusted his tie for the 10th time. The judge entered, robe flowing, gavel striking once. Case number 4821, Karen Ellis versus John Carter. Plaintiff, you may begin. Karen's attorney rose. He tried to project confidence, but his voice carried a rehearsed quality. Your Honor, the plaintiff brings before this court a case of excessive force and emotional trauma. Mr. Carter, a former Navy SEAL, is a trained fighter. He used his combat skills against 3 men hired as security contractors, men who were merely performing their duties. I clenched my jaw. Sarah squeezed my hand to keep me steady. The attorney paced dramatically. Not only were these men injured, but Mrs. Ellis's reputation has suffered irreparable harm. The HOA she leads has lost credibility. All because Mr. Carter decided he was above the rules. Karen lifted her chin, eyes sweeping over the courtroom like she expected applause. The judge nodded once. Defense? Our lawyer, Tom Haskins, rose slowly. No theatrics. Just presence. He carried a folder in one hand and a calm smile. Your Honor, the plaintiff's claims are not only false, they are offensive to the very concept of justice. The so-called security contractors were not licensed, not insured, and not authorized by any legitimate authority. In fact, they were criminals, caught on video impersonating law enforcement officers. He turned, gesturing toward Sarah. The defendant's wife was assaulted in broad daylight. She was slapped. Her phone was destroyed. Her rights were violated. And the plaintiff orchestrated the entire thing. A murmur ran through the gallery. The judge raised an eyebrow. You have evidence? Yes, Your Honor, Tom said. Video evidence. Sarah stood, walking to the clerk's desk, and handed over the phone that had captured everything. A large monitor flickered on. The video played. The courtroom fell silent. There was Sarah, watering the garden, when the SUV pulled up. The men in fake tactical vests. The cheap nylon belts. The phony badges. Then came the moment that made my blood boil every time I saw it, the slap across Sarah's face. Gasps echoed through the room. Even the judge leaned forward. Then me, walking out of the garage, calm but deadly serious. My warning. Their taunts. The fake cuffs hitting the ground. And then, the controlled takedowns. Not brutality. Not rage. Just precision. Finally, Sarah's voice on the recording already called the sheriff. The video ended. The judge sat back, expression unreadable. Karen's lawyer fumbled with his papers. Karen herself had gone pale, a hand twitching at her pearl necklace. Tom stepped forward. His voice was steel. "Your Honor, what you just witnessed is not excessive force. It is self-defense. It is the defense of one's spouse and property. Furthermore, those men admitted under oath to being hired by Mrs. Ellis. They confessed that she paid them cash to intimidate the Carters. That is conspiracy. That is assault. That is a felony." Karen's lawyer tried to recover. "Your Honor, the video lacks context." The judge cut him off. "The context seems quite clear. Those men were criminals impersonating officers. This court will not entertain the argument that their victim was the aggressor." Karen's face hardened. She whispered furiously to her lawyer, but his shoulders sagged like a man already beaten. Tom continued, "Therefore, not only should this frivolous lawsuit be dismissed, but we ask the court to accept our counterclaim for harassment, conspiracy to commit assault, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. My clients deserve restitution." The judge nodded slowly, gaze fixed on Karen. "Mrs. Ellis, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Karen stood abruptly, voice sharp. "This is all a setup. They edited that video. You don't understand what kind of man John Carter really is." "Enough," the judge snapped. His gavel struck once. "This court finds the plaintiff's claims without merit. The case is dismissed. Furthermore, sanctions will be levied against Mrs. Ellis for abuse of the legal system." Karen froze. Her lawyer slumped back into his seat. The gallery erupted in whispers, some neighbors shaking their heads, others smirking with relief. Sarah gripped my hand, her smile quiet but full of strength. I exhaled slowly. One battle was over. But the war with Karen wasn't finished. Not yet. The morning after the courtroom defeat, the neighborhood felt different. The same trimmed hedges and freshly painted mailboxes lined the street, but the air buzzed with whispers. Karen Ellis's SUV sat in her driveway like a stranded battleship, its shine dulled, its presence no longer commanding. Neighbors who once scurried to greet her now crossed the street to avoid her. A woman who had built her power on intimidation was finally tasting the flavor of isolation. Sarah and I sat on the porch with coffee, watching the subtle shift in the block's rhythm. People waved at us now, real waves, not the stiff courtesy of before. A couple even stopped by to ask if Sarah was okay. She smiled, touched her cheek softly, and assured them she was healing fine. But beneath the calm surface, I knew Karen was stewing. Bullies don't collapse in silence. They thrash, claw, and dig deeper until reality forces them under. That evening, the HOA held its monthly board meeting. For the first time in years, the community center was packed. Folding chairs lined the walls, and people stood shoulder to shoulder, buzzing with anticipation. Sarah and I sat near the back, hands linked, waiting. Karen entered late, storming through the double doors in her tailored suit, pearls glinting under the fluorescent lights. She carried a binder thick with papers, her jaw tight. Her allies, two board members who normally flanked her, lagged behind, eyes downcast. She marched to the podium, adjusting the microphone with practiced authority. "This meeting will now come to order," she declared, her voice sharp. But the crowd wasn't buying it. Murmurs rippled across the room. One man near the front raised his hand immediately. "Before we start, I think the board owes the community an explanation about what happened in court yesterday." Applause broke out, surprising even Sarah. Karen's face hardened. "That matter is being misrepresented," she snapped. "The Carters manipulated evidence." Another voice cut her off. "We saw the video, Karen. Half the neighborhood did. Those men weren't security contractors, they were thugs in fake uniforms. And you hired them." Gasps and nods spread like wildfire. Karen tried to regain control. "This is a smear campaign. John Carter is dangerous. He assaulted those men. That was my cue. I stood, my voice calm but carrying weight. The sheriff's office has already charged them with felony impersonation and assault. They're sitting in county jail right now. I didn't attack anyone, I stopped them from hurting my wife. Silence. Then a woman stood up 2 rows ahead. We've all lived under your threats long enough, Karen. The fines, the late-night notices, the constant intimidation. This neighborhood isn't your kingdom. Applause again, louder this time. Karen's eyes darted around the room, searching for allies. The 2 board members beside her avoided her gaze. One of them finally cleared his throat. Karen, maybe it's best if you step down. The HOA can't function with this kind of scandal hanging over it. The words struck like a hammer. Karen's mouth fell open, fury flashing in her eyes. You spineless cowards. After everything I've done for this community? Her voice cracked. People weren't nodding in agreement anymore. They were watching her unravel. I caught Sarah's glance, quiet satisfaction in her eyes. She didn't need revenge. The truth was revenge enough. Karen slammed her binder shut, nearly knocking over the microphone. This meeting is over, she barked. She stormed out, heels clicking like gunfire against the linoleum floor. For a moment, the room sat stunned. Then the applause came, not scattered, but unified. Relief washed over the crowd. The spell had broken. As Sarah and I walked out into the night, neighbors patted my back, shook my hand, thanked Sarah for standing strong. For the first time since moving into the neighborhood, it felt like community, real community, was possible. Karen wasn't finished, I knew. People like her never surrendered quietly. But her grip had cracked, and once a bully's mask slips, there's no putting it back on. Her empire of intimidation was collapsing, brick by brick. And I was ready for whatever came next. The summons came 3 weeks later. Not for me this time, for Karen Ellis. A county deputy knocked on her door in broad daylight, papers in hand, while half the neighborhood peeked through curtains. The sight of the once untouchable HOA president accepting a subpoena was enough to send a ripple of whispers across the block. Karen's face was pale as she took the documents, but her voice carried, shrill and brittle. This is harassment. I'm the victim here. The deputy didn't argue. He just handed her the papers and walked away. Inside that envelope was the lawsuit Tom had promised: conspiracy to commit assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and harassment. With the video, the confessions, and the court's previous sanctions, her case wasn't just weak, it was dead before it began. Sarah and I sat in the front row the day Karen's trial opened. The courtroom wasn't as packed as the HOA meeting had been, but the tension was just as thick. Karen entered with no entourage this time. Her lawyer looked worn down, his suit wrinkled, his eyes tired. She had no pearls around her neck, no blazer, just a plain blouse that failed to soften her sharp edges. The prosecutor laid it out clean. 3 men in custody had testified. Karen Ellis hired them, paid them cash, and instructed them to teach the Carters a lesson. They weren't security professionals. They weren't contractors. They were felons, recruited for intimidation. Then Sarah's video played again. The slap. The threats. My calm warnings. The takedowns. And Sarah's steady voice calling the sheriff. When the screen went black, the silence was heavier than before. Karen's lawyer rose with a feeble attempt at spin. Mrs. Ellis was under tremendous stress. She believed she was protecting the integrity of her community. This was a lapse in judgment, not a crime. The judge didn't even let him finish. Hiring criminals to impersonate law enforcement and assault your neighbors is not a lapse in judgment. It's criminal conspiracy. Karen's eyes darted around, desperate, looking for someone, anyone, to support her. But the gallery was full of neighbors. None met her gaze. A few shook their heads. The gavel came down hard. Karen Ellis, this court finds you guilty of conspiracy to commit assault and harassment. You are hereby sentenced to 18 months in county jail, with fines to be determined. Furthermore, you are permanently barred from serving on any homeowners association board in this state. Karen froze, her mouth opening but no words coming out. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked small. 2 deputies approached. She tried to pull away, shrieking, "You can't do this. I built this neighborhood. You'll regret this." But her voice cracked, echoing against the courtroom walls like the last act of a fallen tyrant. The handcuffs clicked shut, silencing her for good. When the deputies escorted her out, the room exhaled as one. Relief, satisfaction, maybe even a touch of pity, but no one stood for her. Afterward, outside the courthouse, neighbors clustered around us. Some shook my hand, others hugged Sarah. An older couple brought cookies to our porch that night, a quiet thank you for standing up when so many had been too afraid. The HOA board held an emergency session the next week. Without Karen, the meetings were quieter, focused on actual community needs, potholes, landscaping, holiday events. People smiled more. The tension that had once blanketed the neighborhood lifted like fog in the morning sun. One evening, Sarah and I sat on our porch swing, coffee mugs in hand, our dogs at our feet. The sunset painted the sky gold and crimson. For the first time in months, the street felt peaceful. "You know," Sarah said softly, leaning her head on my shoulder, "I never thought your Navy SEAL training would matter in a place like this." I smiled, kissing the top of her head. Neither did I. But bullies are bullies, whether they're warlords overseas or HOA presidents at home. The difference is, this time, we fought in our own backyard. She chuckled. And we won. I looked out over the quiet street, the children playing without fear, the neighbors chatting freely. Karen's empire was gone, and in its place was something stronger, community. Peace wasn't given to us. We earned it. And no one was ever going to take it away again.